Hello, and welcome to Somnistry Stories. Tonight, we step into a quiet attic workshop where gears turn, rain whispers against the skylight, and time moves at its own unhurried pace. Let the sound of the rain and the steady ticking of clocks ease you into rest. The rain fell with unwavering constancy upon the attic skylight, its gentle percussion forming a soothing backdrop to the evening's quietude. Within the workshop, sheltered from the damp chill of the gathering night, Hugo sat at his workbench, his weathered hands hovering above the disassembled parts of a music box. The green-shaded lamp cast its warm glow across the worn oak surface, illuminating tiny brass gears and delicate springs arranged in a meticulous half-circle before him. "Tick-tock," he whispered to the silent mechanism, his voice barely audible above the rhythmic patter of raindrops. "We'll have you singing again by morning." The workshop embraced him in its familiar comfort. A cramped attic space with sloped ceilings where dozens of clocks marked time in overlapping rhythms. Some quick, some languorous, some precise, some still awaiting Hugo's patient touch to awaken them from their slumber. The rust-red enamel stove in the corner radiated a steady warmth that permeated the room, its gentle heat expanding outward in invisible waves. Upon the stove sat a copper kettle, its once brilliant surface now burnished to a soft patina through years of faithful service. Small beads of condensation had begun to form around its base, evidence of the water slowly warming within. Hugo glanced up from his work, watching as the first wisp of steam emerged from the kettle's spout, a delicate, translucent ribbon that curled upward before dissolving into the air. The steam's appearance coincided with a subtle shift in the workshop's atmosphere, where moments before the air had held the dry crispness of winter, it now took on a softer quality, each breath carrying a hint of dampness that eased the tightness in Hugo's chest. He inhaled deeply, appreciating this gentle transformation as the kettle continued its patient work. From the spout, a second wisp of steam emerged, slightly more substantial than the first. It rose in a twisting column, catching the lamplight as it ascended, transforming from mere vapor to a luminous golden thread that danced and swayed with currents invisible to the eye. The steam climbed higher, reaching toward the workshop's sloped ceiling before dispersing among the oak beams, draped with cobwebs that had accumulated over countless rainy evenings. Hugo reached for his smallest screwdriver, the first from the left on his meticulously organized tool rack, and returned his attention to the music box. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. Each turn of the tiny screw was executed with precision, his fingers moving with the careful rhythm born from decades of practice. There was no rush here, no urgency, only the steady passage of time marked by rain, ticking clocks, and the increasingly persistent hiss of the warming kettle. As Hugo worked, a draft slipped through a narrow gap beneath the workshop's door, not strong enough to disturb the papers on his desk, but sufficient to set the air in motion. The current travelled across the floor, invisible yet detectable in its effects as it approached the stove. There, warmed by the gentle heat, it rose upward, creating a subtle convection current that circulated throughout the small space. The rising air encountered a pile of fine sawdust gathered beneath Hugo's secondary workbench, evidence of yesterday's labours, when he had crafted a new housing for a particularly delicate wall clock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as the air current strengthened ever so slightly, the smallest particles began to lift, suspended in the golden lamplight like tiny motes of dust caught in a sunbeam. Hugo paused his work, the screwdriver held motionless between his fingers as he observed the gentle stirring. The finest particles of sawdust began to drift upward, catching the lamplight as they rose. Each speck illuminated like a miniature star ascending into the workshop's atmosphere. The warm air from the stove created a subtle current that carried the lightest particles in a lazy, drifting path. "Well, hello there," Hugo murmured, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he observed this small wonder. The dancing specks shimmered briefly in the golden light, before settling once more as the air current subsided, a fleeting moment of beauty in the workshop's tranquil atmosphere. The copper kettle released a more insistent hiss, drawing Hugo's attention back to the stove. The steam now emerged in a steady stream, no longer individual wisps, but a continuous flow that rose toward the ceiling. Unlike the sharp whistle of a boiling kettle, this sound was gentle, soothing, a soft exhalation that added another layer to the workshop's peaceful soundscape. As the steam continued its upward journey, it spread outward, forming a thin veil that caught and diffused the lamplight. The effect was subtle but transformative, softening the workshop's edges and lending the space a dreamlike quality. Shadows became less defined, the boundaries between objects less certain, as if the entire room were viewed through the thinnest layer of morning fog. Hugo polished his glasses with a chamois cloth he kept in his breast pocket, the first of his twice-hourly rituals. He did this without thinking, an action so deeply ingrained that his hands moved of their own accord. The soft fabric glided over the round lenses in circular motions, removing the faint condensation that had begun to form from the steam of the copper kettle. Replacing his glasses, the world came back into focus with renewed clarity. The steam's presence seemed more pronounced now, its interaction with the lamplight creating delicate plays of illumination throughout the workshop. Hugo could see how it gathered in the corners of the skylight, forming droplets that would eventually join the rain's journey down the glass. The draft beneath the door strengthened momentarily, perhaps responding to a gust of wind outside or a change in pressure as the storm continued its slow passage over the town. This new current of air met the warm updraft from the stove, creating a gentle movement of air throughout the workshop. Beneath the secondary workbench, the sawdust responded to this change with subtle beauty. The finest particles lifted once more, creating a thin veil of golden dust that hovered just above the floor. The particles drifted in the lamplight, not in organized patterns, but in the natural random dance of lightweight specks caught in competing air currents. Hugo watched, momentarily transfixed by this silent performance. The sawdust motes varied in size, the larger bits barely moving while the finest dust caught the light as they floated. They shimmered as they drifted through different angles of illumination, sometimes appearing as bright pinpoints, sometimes nearly invisible, their presence revealed only by their momentary glinting in the warm glow of the lamp. The kettle's hiss intensified slightly, not intrusively, but with enough presence to form a counterpoint to the rain's steady rhythm. Steam now filled the upper portion of the workshop, hanging beneath the sloped ceiling like a gentle cloud. As it cooled, small droplets began to form and descend, not as rain, but as a fine mist that settled on surfaces throughout the room. A microscopic layer of moisture that would evaporate almost as soon as it landed, leaving no trace of its brief existence. Hugo returned to the music box, adjusting a tiny spring with the tip of his screwdriver. The mechanism began to respond to his attentions, the tension in the mainspring finding its proper balance. He turned a small key protruding from the side of the box, winding it partially to test the resistance. Satisfied with the feel, he continued his work, aligning the teeth of a minuscule gear with its neighboring component. "Tick-tock," he whispered again, this customary address now sweetened by the moisture in the air. "Finding your voice again, aren't you?" The sawdust continued its gentle movement, the air currents in the room occasionally lifting small clouds of the finest particles. They drifted slowly near the floor, sometimes settling in faint patterns on the wooden planks, delicate traceries that would remain visible only until the next disturbance of air erased them. The floating motes travelled with the air currents beneath chairs, around table legs, and across the faded paisley rug stained with oil from countless repairs. Hugo reached into his apron pocket, retrieving a small dented tin box. The tin had once been brightly painted, but years of being carried in Hugo's pocket had worn away most of the design, leaving only hints of what might have been flowers, or perhaps a landscape scene. He ran his thumb over the smooth, worn surface before carefully prying open the lid. The sharp, clean scent of peppermint immediately brightened the air around him, cutting through the workshop's blend of clock oil, brass, and the new humidity from the kettle's steam. Hugo inhaled deeply, allowing the refreshing aroma to fill his lungs. The mint carried with it a crisp clarity, like the first breath on a winter morning, invigorating yet somehow calming in its purity. He selected a single white peppermint from the tin, noting how it contrasted against the dark stains on his fingertips, evidence of years working with oils and polishes. Placing the mint on his tongue, Hugo closed the tin with a soft click and returned it to his pocket. The peppermint dissolved slowly, releasing its cool sweetness gradually as he resumed his work on the music box. The copper kettle now sang its gentle song continuously, the steam forming a consistent veil that hovered beneath the ceiling beams. As the vapor cooled and condensed, it began a new journey. Tiny droplets forming and descending in a cycle that mimicked the rain outside, but on a much smaller, more intimate scale. This indoor precipitation was so fine as to be almost imperceptible, felt rather than seen as a subtle change in the texture of the air. The movement of sawdust continued in its subtle way, responding to the ever-changing currents in the workshop's air. As the kettle's heat increased, the convection current near the stove strengthened slightly, creating a more noticeable effect. In one corner near the stove, where the rising warm air met a cooler downdraft, a small temporary eddy formed, a gentle swirling of the finest particles no wider than Hugo's palm. This delicate vortex lasted only moments, rising slightly as it was drawn toward the stove by the stronger updraft. As it approached the source of heat, the particles dispersed, lifted higher by the warmth. The finest motes drifted upward toward the ceiling, where for a brief moment they intersected with the steam from the kettle. The two elements, one solid, one vapor, sharing the same space in a fleeting encounter before separating again. The dust settling slowly, while the steam continued its journey to the rafters. Hugo turned his attention back to the music box, its mechanism slowly coming to life beneath his patient hands. The intricate array of pins on the brass cylinder caught the lamplight, each one positioned to strike a specific tooth on the steel comb when the mechanism turned. He adjusted the tension spring with careful precision, ensuring it would drive the cylinder at exactly the right pace. Not too fast, not too slow, but at the perfect tempo for the melody it was designed to play. The music box held a special place among Hugo's projects. Unlike clocks, which measured time through steady, consistent movement, music boxes transform time into melody, giving it texture and emotion. This particular box had been silent for nearly a decade, brought to him by an elderly woman who remembered it playing on her mother's dresser when she was a child. Soon, Hugo murmured to the dormant mechanism, "You'll remember your song." He reached for a small brush with soft bristles, using it to gently clear away the last traces of tarnish from the steel comb. Each tooth was a different length, carefully calculated to produce a specific note when struck. Together, they contained the potential for music, a melody sleeping within metal, waiting for motion to give it voice. Hugo set down his brush and selected a tiny file with a diamond-shaped cross-section. With careful strokes, he refined the profile of a single tooth on the steel comb, one that had been slightly bent during the music box's years of silence. His movements were precise and deliberate, each pass of the file removing the smallest possible amount of material. This was not work that could be rushed, Perfection required patience. With the tooth properly aligned, Hugo next examined the brass cylinder at the heart of the music box. He rotated it slowly between his fingers, the pins catching the lamplight as they turned. One pin had become slightly loose over the years, no longer protruding at the precise height needed to strike its corresponding tooth with the proper force. From a small drawer beneath his workbench, Hugo retrieved a specialized tool of his own design. A slender brass implement with a cupped end perfectly sized to fit over the head of a music box pin. He positioned it carefully, then applied gentle pressure, seating the pin more firmly in its hole without damaging either the pin or the cylinder. The brass cylinder now gleamed under the lamplight, each pin standing at attention, ready to fulfill its role in creating music. Hugo placed it back into the mechanism, aligning it with the gears that would drive its rotation. With a pair of fine-tipped tweezers, he made a final adjustment to the position of the governor, the component that would ensure the cylinder rotated at a constant speed, neither rushing nor dragging the melody. The copper kettle had reached its ideal temperature, releasing a steady stream of gentle vapor that filled the upper portion of the workshop. Unlike the urgent whistle of boiling water, this was the perfect stage, warm enough to humidify the dry winter air, but not so hot as to fill the room with billowing clouds of steam. Hugo had learned through years of experience precisely how much wood to add to the stove to maintain this ideal warmth throughout his evening's work. The humidified air was particularly beneficial to the wooden components of the clocks and musical instruments in his care. The fine cabinetry of clock cases and the delicate wooden soundboards of music boxes all responded favorably to this controlled moisture, preventing the splitting and cracking that could occur in overly dry conditions. What had begun as personal comfort, the kettle's warmth on cold evenings, had become an essential aspect of Hugo's conservation practice. As if appreciating this gentle care, the wooden case of the music box seemed to relax slightly in the humid atmosphere, its joints settling into more perfect alignment. What might have required mechanical adjustment in drier conditions resolved itself naturally in the workshop's carefully balanced environment. Hugo lifted the partially assembled music box to his ear, turning the winding key slightly to test the mechanism's engagement. The first soft click as the pile caught the ratchet wheel was promising. A smooth, precise sound that indicated proper alignment. He wound it a quarter turn more, listening intently to the subtle language of metal against metal, a dialect he had learned to interpret over decades of practice. Satisfied with the sound, Hugo returned the music box to his workbench. Only a few components remained to be reinstalled. The damper that would silence notes at the appropriate moment, and the fine brass lid support that would hold the decorative cover at the perfect angle when opened. These final elements would transform the mechanism from a functional object back into an item of beauty, marrying purpose with aesthetics. The workshop had settled into a deeper tranquility now, the various sounds blending into a soothing ambient chorus. Rain against the skylight, clocks marking seconds in their overlapping voices, the kettle's gentle hiss, and the occasional soft click as Hugo's tools met metal or wood. These sounds existed in perfect balance, none dominating the others, creating an acoustic environment as carefully tuned as any musical instrument. Hugo paused to sip from his teacup, which had cooled to the perfect drinking temperature. The chamomile had steeped to an ideal strength, its subtle floral notes complementing the workshop's other aromas. He held the liquid briefly in his mouth, appreciating how the flavor changed subtly as it warmed. First the bright grassy top notes, then the deeper honey-like sweetness beneath. Setting down the cup, Hugo noticed that the sawdust on the floor had largely settled, the air currents having diminished as the workshop's atmosphere reached equilibrium. A few of the finest particles still drifted occasionally, catching the lamplight like tiny emissaries from a microscopic world. But most had come to rest in a thin, even layer across the floorboards, a golden dusting that softened the workshop's well-worn surfaces. The wooden cuckoo figurine perched atop a broken clock seemed to observe Hugo's work with its permanent, unblinking gaze. Despite its missing beak, the carving retained a dignified presence, a silent witness to countless evenings of patient restoration. Hugo had never repaired it, feeling that its imperfection added character, a reminder that even damaged things held beauty and purpose. From a small box lined with green felt, Hugo selected a replacement governor spring for the music box. The original had lost some of its tension after decades of use, no longer providing the consistent resistance needed for smooth operation. The new spring was made of modern material but crafted to traditional specifications, an invisible update that would preserve the authentic voice of the antique mechanism. Installing the spring required a steady hand and perfect control. Hugo held his breath slightly as he positioned it within the governor assembly, using a specialized tool to seat it properly, without applying too much pressure. When released, the spring settled perfectly into place, its tension exactly calibrated to control the music box's tempo. Next came the process of reattaching the steel comb to the base plate. Hugo positioned it carefully, aligning it so that each tooth would be struck by its corresponding pin with perfect accuracy. The spacing was critical. Too close and the notes would sound pinched. Too distant and they would lack resonance. He secured it with tiny brass screws, tightening each one in sequence to ensure even pressure across the entire comb. With the comb securely in place, Hugo used a magnifying glass to examine the alignment once more, scrutinizing the relationship between pins and teeth from multiple angles. Satisfied with the positioning, he made one final adjustment to the drive gear, ensuring that when wound, the cylinder would rotate with smooth, consistent motion. The wooden case of the music box awaited its rejuvenated mechanism. Hugo had cleaned and polished it earlier in the week, restoring the rich luster of the walnut and repairing a small crack in the decorative inlay. The wood had a warm amber glow in the lamplight, its grain patterns telling the story of the tree it had once been. A living history preserved in the carefully crafted object. Hugo gently lowered the mechanism into the case, guiding it into position with practiced hands. The fit was perfect, as it had been when first created by its maker nearly a century ago. He secured it with 4 small brass screws, turned until snug but not tight enough to stress the aged wood. The final component was the lid, a delicately crafted piece with mother-of-pearl inlay, forming a stylized floral pattern. Hugo attached it with restored brass hinges, adjusting them to ensure the lid would open smoothly and remain at the desired angle when raised. He tested the movement several times, listening for any hint of binding or resistance. The lid rose and fell in perfect silence, a testament to the precision of his work. With the music box fully assembled, Hugo straightened his posture, stretching subtly to release the tension that had accumulated during the extended period of close, detailed work. He rolled his shoulders gently, aligning his spine, allowing his body to find its natural balance. These small movements were as much a part of his practice as any technical skill. The physical discipline that allowed him to maintain the steady hands and careful attention his craft required. The time had come to test the music box, to discover whether its voice had been successfully restored after years of silence. Hugo placed it carefully on a clear section of his workbench, positioning it so that the resonance would not be dampened by nearby objects. With gentle fingers, he located the winding key and began to turn it, feeling the gradually increasing resistance as the spring coiled tighter. When fully wound, he paused, his hand hovering above the small lever that would release the mechanism and begin the performance. This moment always held a particular significance, the culmination of hours of meticulous work, the threshold between potential and realization. Hugo took a deep breath, savoring the anticipation, then carefully engaged the lever. The mechanism engaged with a soft, precise click, and the cylinder began to rotate at exactly the intended pace. As the first pins struck their corresponding teeth, notes emerged from the steel cone, tentative at first, then growing in confidence as the mechanism settled into its rhythm. The melody unfolded note by note, a forgotten voice returning to life in the tranquil workshop. Hugo listened with complete attention, his eyes half closed as he focused on the quality of each note. The tune was a simple waltz, popular when the music box was created. A gentle, lilting melody that seemed perfectly suited to the rain-washed evening. The notes hung in the humid air, their resonance enhanced by the workshop's wooden surfaces, creating a sound both intimate and enveloping. The spring-driven mechanism transformed potential energy into music, each note precisely as intended by the original maker. Hugo noted with satisfaction that the tempo remained perfectly consistent throughout the piece, neither rushing toward the end nor dragging as the spring's tension diminished. The governor was performing its role flawlessly, maintaining the delicate balance between power and control. As the final notes of the melody faded into the workshop's ambient soundscape, Hugo nodded with quiet satisfaction. The music box had found its voice again, its song joining the rain, the ticking clocks, and the kettle's gentle hiss in the harmonious conversation that filled the workshop each evening. Another small piece of beauty had been restored to the world, not with dramatic transformation, but through patient, methodical care. Hugo gently closed the music box's lid, allowing it to rest before its next performance. He would play it several more times throughout the evening, listening for any subtle adjustments that might still be needed. But the fundamental work was complete. The mechanism was sound, its voice clear, its purpose fulfilled. The copper kettle had settled into a steady state, its water warm enough to release a consistent amount of steam without approaching a boil. This constancy was emblematic of the workshop as a whole, a carefully maintained equilibrium where each element contributed to an overall sense of tranquility and order. The restored music box now rested on a small shelf near Hugo's workbench, occasionally filling the workshop with its gentle melody when he activated it. With this project completed, he turned his attention to another timepiece awaiting his care. A maritime chronometer housed in a mahogany box with brass corner protectors. This was a precision instrument designed for navigation at sea, its mechanism suspended in gimbals to maintain accuracy regardless of a ship's movement through rolling waves. Hugo opened the chronometer's case with particular reverence. These instruments had guided ships across vast oceans, their reliable timekeeping, allowing navigators to determine longitude and chart accurate courses through trackless waters. The responsibility of maintaining such a device was not taken lightly. Lives had once depended on its accuracy. The chronometer's face was a study in clarity, with bold Roman numerals and a separate subdial for seconds. Its blued steel hands stood out sharply against the white enamel, designed to be read easily in the varying light conditions of a ship's navigation room. Unlike decorative timepieces, everything about the chronometer's design served its critical function. Hugo carefully removed the protective glass, setting it on a cushioned tray to his right. The chronometer's mechanism was a masterpiece of engineering, built to withstand the challenges of maritime use, while maintaining accuracy that would be impressive even in a stationary clock. Its balance wheel was larger than those in pocket watches, providing greater stability, and its escapement was designed to function reliably despite changes in temperature and humidity. The specific issue with this chronometer was subtle, a slight inconsistency in its rate that would be insignificant in a domestic timepiece, but potentially meaningful for navigation. Hugo suspected the D10 spring in the escapement had weakened slightly, a common occurrence in instruments of this age. From a specially designated drawer in his workbench, Hugo retrieved a set of tools reserved exclusively for work on marine chronometers. These included specialized tweezers with extra fine tips, a selection of springs of various strengths, and measuring instruments capable of detecting variations too small for the human eye to discern. With methodical care, Hugo loosened the screws that secured the movement to the gimbals, allowing him to lift it partially from its housing for better access to the escapement. Each component was treated with the utmost respect, not merely as mechanical parts, but as elements of a harmonious system that had faithfully served for decades. Under his magnifying glass, the detent escapement revealed its secret. Not a weakened spring, as he had initially suspected, but a minute particle of dust that had found its way into the mechanism, occasionally interfering with the detent's movement. This was actually a simpler issue to address, requiring careful cleaning rather than component replacement. Hugo selected the finest brush from his collection, its bristles so soft that they could touch the most delicate surfaces without risk of damage. With gentle, precise strokes, he removed the dust particle, taking care not to disturb the careful adjustment of the surrounding components. The escapement now moved with perfect freedom, each action precise and unimpeded. While the chronometer's movement was accessible, Hugo took the opportunity to examine the other components, ensuring that no additional issues were developing. The oil on the pivot points remained clear and effective. The jeweled bearings showed no signs of wear, and all screws were properly tensioned. This thoroughness was a hallmark of his approach, addressing not only the immediate concern, but anticipating and preventing future problems. Satisfied with the condition of the mechanism, Hugo carefully lowered it back into position within its gimbals, securing it with the proper tension, firm enough to prevent unwanted movement, but not so tight as to create stress on any component. He checked the alignment multiple times, viewing the assembly from different angles to confirm that everything was perfectly centered. The newly cleaned chronometer would need to be observed over time to confirm that the issue had been fully resolved. Hugo set it on a special shelf reserved for timepieces under observation, positioned where he could easily monitor its rate throughout the evening. He made a note in his leather-bound journal, recording the work performed and the current rate of the instrument, providing a baseline for comparison as the hours passed. With the chronometer ticking steadily in its monitoring position, Hugo took a moment to attend to another aspect of his workshop environment. The wood in the stove had burned down considerably, shifting from active flames to a bed of glowing embers that provided a different quality of heat. Slower, more consistent, more penetrating. He opened the small iron door and carefully added 2 pieces of seasoned apple wood from the stack beside the stove. Applewood was a particular favorite for evening burning. It produced less smoke than many other woods and imparted a subtle, pleasant fragrance to the air as it burned. The fresh logs settled onto the embers with a soft hiss, small flames licking up around their edges as they began to catch. Hugo closed the stove door, adjusting the damper to provide exactly the right amount of airflow for a slow, steady burn. Returning to his workbench, Hugo noticed that the copper kettle had depleted much of its water through steady evaporation. He lifted it carefully, feeling its diminished weight, and carried it to the small sink in the corner of the workshop. The old iron tap produced a stream of cool, clear water with which he refilled the kettle to its optimal level. Not too full, allowing space for the water to heat without risk of boiling over. He returned the kettle to its place on the stove, positioning it where it would receive enough heat to resume its gentle steaming, but not so much as to bring it to a vigorous boil. Within minutes, the first wisps of fresh steam began to rise from the spout, rejoining the workshop's atmosphere. With the chronometer repair completed, Hugo considered his next task for the evening. His gaze settled on a barometer hanging on the wall near his secondary workbench. Not a timepiece, but still a precision instrument that measured atmospheric pressure, providing insight into coming weather changes. Its mahogany case had developed a fine crack along one edge, likely due to seasonal changes in humidity, and required careful attention to prevent further damage. Hugo retrieved the barometer from its hook, bringing it to his main workbench where the light was strongest. The instrument consisted of a glass tube containing mercury, sealed at one end and open at the other, with the open end submerged in a small reservoir of mercury. Changes in atmospheric pressure caused the mercury column to rise or fall, with measurements indicated on a calibrated scale beside the tube. The crack in the case was superficial, not affecting the function of the instrument itself, but requiring attention nonetheless. From a bottom drawer, Hugo selected a bottle of specially prepared hide glue, a traditional adhesive that had proven its reliability over centuries of use in fine woodworking. Unlike modern alternatives, hide glue remained reversible, allowing future repairs without damage to the original materials. He warmed the bottle gently in a small water bath kept specifically for this purpose, bringing the glue to the precise temperature where it achieved optimal viscosity. While it warmed, he used a fine artist's brush to clean the crack, removing any dust or debris that might interfere with adhesion. The wood surrounding the crack was sound, with no signs of rot or insect damage, making a straightforward repair possible. Using a slender artist's spatula, Hugo applied the warmed glue to the crack with great precision, ensuring it penetrated fully without excess that would require extensive cleanup. He then secured the case with specially shaped cabinet maker's clamps, lined with cork to prevent marring the finish. The clamps applied even pressure along the length of the crack, bringing the wood surfaces into perfect alignment. The repair would need to remain clamped overnight to allow the glue to cure completely, so Hugo positioned the barometer on a dedicated shelf where it would not be disturbed. He made another entry in his journal, noting the repair details and the current barometric reading: 29.92 inches of mercury, indicating stable weather conditions consistent with the steady rain outside. As the evening progressed toward 8 o'clock, the quality of light in the workshop began to shift subtly. The green-shaded lamp maintained its steady illumination, but the diminishing natural light outside changed the character of the shadows, deepening them in the corners of the room. This gradual transition was barely perceptible, moment to moment, yet over time transformed the workshop's atmosphere. With both the chronometer and barometer attended to, Hugo began the process of setting his workshop in order for the evening. He cleaned and organized his tools, returning each to its designated place. The specialized chronometer tools were wiped clean of any oils or residues before being placed back in their felt-lined drawer. The hide glue was sealed and returned to its shelf, and the small water bath was emptied and dried. The workshop's various timepieces continued their measured conversation, each contributing its unique voice to the ensemble. The wall clock's steady tick formed a foundation, while the carriage clock's lighter tone provided counterpoint. The grandfather clock in the corner added its dignified bass note, and the newly serviced chronometer contributed its precise, authoritative rhythm. Together, they created not cacophony, but harmony, a complex tapestry of sound that filled the space with the comforting presence of measured time. The rain maintained its gentle percussion on the skylight, its pattern occasionally shifting, but its presence constant. Sometimes it fell in straight lines, creating parallel tracks down the glass. Other times, it gathered in small pools before continuing its journey. Each variation brought subtle changes to the quality of sound, adding richness to the workshop's acoustic environment without disrupting its fundamental tranquility. As 8 o'clock approached, Hugo completed his preparations for the evening's transition. The stove was well supplied with apple wood, sufficient to maintain gentle warmth throughout the night. The kettle contained enough water to continue releasing occasional wisps of steam, preserving the workshop's ideal humidity. The lamp was adjusted to provide exactly the right level of illumination, bright enough to prevent strain, but soft enough to respect the natural rhythm of evening. The workshop had reached a state of perfect equilibrium as the evening deepened toward 9 o'clock. The stove provided consistent warmth. The kettle contributed its gentle moisture to the air, and the collection of timepieces filled the space with their overlapping rhythms, each voice distinct yet contributing to a harmonious whole. The rain maintained its steady presence, neither increasing nor diminishing, but continuing with the patient persistence that had characterized the entire evening. Hugo moved unhurriedly around his domain, completing the small rituals that would transition the workshop from a place of active work to one of nighttime repose. He arranged his tools in their designated places. Each one returned to its proper position in the carefully organized system he had developed over decades. Brushes, files, screwdrivers, and specialized implements all found their home, ready for the next day's projects. The workbench was wiped clean with a soft cloth, removing any traces of brass dust or wood particles. Hugo took particular care with this task, appreciating how a properly prepared workspace contributed to both efficiency and tranquility. The green felt surface emerged from beneath the day's accumulation, restored to its proper state. Throughout the workshop, the various timepieces prepared to mark the hour. The grandfather clock in the corner cleared its throat with the familiar whirring that preceded its chime. The carriage clock on the shelf tightened its spring in preparation. The maritime chronometer maintained its steady, authoritative tick. Each approached the moment in its own way, yet all were synchronized to mark the same passage of time. Hugo settled into his chair, not the rarely used armchair with its tartan blanket, but his own wooden seat worn to the perfect contour of his form. He removed his glasses and placed them on the small table beside him, his world softening slightly at the edges as he did so. The day's work was complete. Each project advanced or concluded according to its needs, each timepiece ticking with renewed purpose. As the clocks began to mark 9 o'clock, Hugo closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen more fully. The grandfather clock struck first, its deep, resonant tones filling the workshop with dignified authority. The carriage clock followed with a brighter voice, its notes clear and precise. The wall clock contributed its measured cadence. Together, they created a brief symphony of time, each voice completing the others. When the final chime faded, only the steady background sounds remained, the rain continuing its gentle conversation with the skylight, the stove offering occasional soft pops as the embers shifted, and the dozens of clocks marking seconds in their overlapping patterns. These sounds would continue through the night, unchanging yet never exactly the same. A living soundscape that filled the workshop with peaceful presence. Hugo opened his eyes and surveyed his domain once more. The tools rested in their places. The wood gleamed with subtle luster in the lamp's warm glow, and the clocks continued their patient work of measuring time. The rain traced ever-changing patterns down the skylight, illuminated by the last gentle adjustment of the lamp's wick, now lowered to provide just enough light to give form to the room, without dispelling the comfort of evening shadows. The workshop existed in perfect balance, a harmony of sound, light, warmth and purpose that required nothing more to be complete. Hugo's presence within this carefully cultivated environment was neither dominant nor passive, but integrated, another essential element in the workshop's composition. Man and space existed in mutual complement, each enhancing the other through years of shared existence. As Hugo settled deeper into his chair, his attention expanded to encompass the entire workshop as a single, unified experience. The individual sounds, sights, and sensations merged into a comprehensive whole. A sensory tapestry of exceptional richness, yet remarkable subtlety. This was not merely a place of work, but a carefully crafted world unto itself, insulated from the harsher realities beyond its walls, yet connected through the gentle intermediary of rain. The distant church bells could be heard through the rain, their sound softened by distance and water into a melodious reminder of the world beyond. 9 deep tones confirm the workshop clock's accuracy. The final bell fading into the ambient soundscape rather than ending abruptly. The clocks continued their work, marking moments with quiet diligence. The rain maintained its gentle percussion on the skylight. The stove provided its steady warmth. And within this perfect constancy, Hugo found a profound peace that came from complete harmony with one's environment. A tranquility born not of emptiness, but of perfect fullness, where nothing needed to be added and nothing needed to be taken away. The workshop sighed into the night, its breath composed of ticking clocks, gentle rain, and the soft murmur of embers. These sounds would continue their patient conversation for hours to come, maintaining their soothing presence long after conscious attention had faded into the deeper rhythms of rest. The clocks hummed in unison, their chorus blending with the rain's endless song, and the workshop settled into the night, complete in its quiet perfection.